Hey, what's up everyone? DREAGEN back again, here to tell you that you should be reading Far-Seer. So Far-Seer is a 1992 science fiction novel written by Robert J. Sawyer and takes place on a distant world where a race called, I'm going to try to say their names right, so I apologize if I screw this up, the Quintilago, I believe is how you say it, but I could be wrong, which are essentially slightly anthropomorphized tyrannosaurs that are considerably small. They stand up at around 8-9 feet tall. Overall have the general posture of a T-Rex, but they're a bit more vertical. Think of maybe more of the more inaccurate depictions of T-Rex and dinosaurs in general from like yesteryear, when you kind of saw them standing upright, kind of dragging their tails more. And they have larger dexterous arms and like thumbs and fingers and what have you, so they kind of manipulate their environment. They are an intelligent, sentient race, and they are essentially kind of what I would say in their in terms of level of technology, their Renaissance era, if you will. It is a non-industrial civilized society. It kind of basically looks like human civilization just before the industrial civilization, or industrial revolution, excuse me. Basically, we're still using beasts of burden for, like, drawn carriages. In this iteration, they are dinosaurs that are, not evolved to the point of kind of like their level of intelligence. So you still see dinosaurs that resemble those of like what we would think of dinosaurs in prehistoric past. Yet, for some reason in this world, tyrannosaurs, they evolved to be smaller and more compact. And if you guys remember the 80s cartoon series Dinosaurs, maybe kind of think a little bit more on those lines. For all of you guys who actually know what that is, you're awesome. And for guys who don't know, look it up, Dinosaurs. But yeah, so it follows this astrologer, Afsan, who is basically, he is just kind of coming to the capital city. He is going to be sort of his apprenticeship, because in this world, it is a very religious society. You find out that this whole culture, they have a matriarchal kind of deity, and every one of their members of the race needs to most of them need to go on this pilgrimage where they go to see the face of God, which is this large orb in the sky. They have to kind of travel downriver, because as they believe that the continent, the landmass which they live on, is essentially just a giant island that is constantly floating downstream, and it's only going in one direction. And you can't go past the face of God. You have to go there where the face of God is directly above you, and that is the furthest you can go. You have to gaze upon it in reflection and what have you, and then come back. You got to go back upstream. Well, Afsan, using this new device called the Far-Seer, which is just like a spyglass basically that you would use, is able to kind of look upon the face of God, and comes to an interesting realization that the face of God is in fact a planet. It's a large gas giant basically, and that the other dots that you see in the sky are moons, and as well as other planets, and that they're not all on the same plane, but they're actually in different positions in outer space, and they're actually all revolving around the light source that illuminates all of them, which is the sun, and that the world that they're on is in fact a moon, the closest moon to the face of God. Well, with this long story short, what all this does is cause a huge, big of kind of a firestorm, because essentially he has just discovered that God is not God. It's just a planet. It is a natural body in space, and that it is no more significant than that they are just a moon, and they are just one of several moons, and they're all part of just this celestial system in the sky. And there's really nothing special about them, except that by being the closest moon to this large gas giant, their world is eventually going to come to an end, and that because it is experiencing seismic and volcanic instability. They've described that in the past there are less earthquakes, less eruptions, but as time has been moving on through the centuries, it is increasing. And it's because their gravitational proximity to this larger body in space, it's just kind of slowly disrupting the planet, and eventually will destroy the moon, and that they need to get off this world some way, somehow. Problem with this is that the entire political structure is based upon this religion, specifically the royal family. The royal family are the descendants of the original prophet who first gazed upon the face of God and essentially came up with this religion. Prior to that, there was another religion, old religion, the hunters' religion, that worshipped like the 5 original hunters. And now this is kind of equal to what we might discern as like paganism, if you will, in our world. So if you look at like most of Europe now, the official religion of Europe is Christianity. Yes, I know there's different sects of it. There's Catholic, Roman Catholic, Protestant, whatever. But as a whole, it's the religion that the Judeo-Christian Bible religion. But prior to that, Europe had the Celts, it had the Gauls, it had pagan religions that predate Christianity. The various Norse religions. So that's kind of what this older religion represents. And they're still kind of, it's kind of kept hush-hush, or it's kind of kept kind of subdued, but there's still, those, especially people living in the outlying regions, who kind of still follow, maybe unofficially or practice this older religious kind of practice. But yeah, so naturally, the emperor, or soon-to-be emperor, one of his best friends is on, this pilgrimage with him, and initially it seems like he's going to support him, but when he gets back to the capital, he realizes things have changed. His religious advisors have spoken to them, and essentially it's all he can do to keep them from just executing, Afsan. And you quickly come to understand that his family is important. They are royal because they are descendants of this original prophet. If this prophet was just some guy who got all this wrong, who just in his ignorance looked up at this big floating ball in the sky and just thought, God, because he has no knowledge, no methodology to apply kind of the scientific method to it, to realize that what this was, or nor did he have the tools that Afsan had to kind of be able to properly or more clearly deduce what he was seeing, just kind of in his primitive ignorance just deemed it a deity. It's a big round thing in the sky that looks bigger than me. I don't know. God? Sure, we'll go with that. And because of that, he became a prophet, and therefore his lineage became special. But if this guy was wrong, if he was a false prophet, then that means the legitimacy of control that this line of succession that the emperor, and the empress before him has is null and void, because now they're no longer special. So right away you see politics get involved. You realize that the preservation of this religion has less to do with really faith or what people believe, and more or less people just trying to hold on to control, because surprise, surprise, the religious authority in this kingdom is the authority. They control, they hold down. You see the corruption, how deep it runs, and you see how far they are willing to go to even basically bend the rules and twist the meaning of certain dogmatic rules they have set to kind of, serve their own interests. For instance, it is forbidden for their race to kill and to murder each other, and yet, one of the high priests even, basically kind of tells like, yeah, well, if we interpret it this way, we can execute you, we can do this to you. You really want us to do that? You really want us to? You don't think we can twist things around to make it work to our benefit? Basically admitting their own corruption, and basically saying that this religion is only really there to keep the populace in control, and just to keep them fat, happy, and healthy, and just living a life of luxury and power, which, well, getting too political, isn't that really what it always is? And that's kind of the issue. So this is not to spoil, I'm not going to spoil the end, but this is a story. This is one of 3. This is a trilogy. I have not read the other 2 books yet. They are on my list. I've already ordered them because I want to go ahead and just jump to the next one, because I really enjoy this one. But it is a story of showing you how change comes about, where while science is still met with resistance to this day, and ironically we live in an age where, especially in the Western world right now, and based on my accent, I'm sure you can kind of deduce where I'm from, there is a lot of pushback against science right now politically, but as a whole, you're not going to get burned at a stake for talking about, movements of celestial bodies. If you believe that we are the process of natural selection over the course of millions of years through successive generations, and not the offspring of 2 people who got it on once upon a time in a garden somewhere, you won't be punished for that. You might be frowned upon that, depending on where you live, depending on what part of this country you live in. You might be treated less than poorly, and there might be people who might have some choice words for you. But just as they are free to say that, you are also free to express that opposing view, and neither one of you then have the legal right to harm the other. I mean, I know it still happens, but then there are legal ramifications for that. But this is representing an age, much like the history of our world, where when a lot of these when these ideas that challenge the more conventional religious view on how things came to be started happening, these individuals were met with an enormous amount of pushback, a dangerous amount, to the point where their own physical person was at risk. And there was probably people before those who even published who maybe stumbled onto some of this, who never published, who never did talk about it. We only hear about the ones who kind of came forward and, Darwin. I mean, this is a classic, parable to Darwin, really. Granted, he's talking, Afson's talking more about, astronomy than evolution, but it's the same practice where, how does, how he's describing their world in its place within the star system directly conflicts on what it's supposed to be within the religious text. Just as how evolution is, they say, well, how can we be the children of God if we, evolve from single-celled organisms, so on and so forth. It was an opposing view against a status quo. And this character is basically saying, I'm not out to disprove God, I'm not out to kill God, I'm just out to tell the truth. This is what I observed. And when people tell him, no, you were wrong. No, I'm not wrong. I saw what I saw. You can feel however you want about it, and believe me, it was a shock to me too, but I saw it with my own eyes. It's there. I have the instruments, and literally anybody else can see the same thing. This wasn't some divine thing that happened just to me. I was just one of the first people to ever use this new instrument, and by looking through it, I was able to see something that no one had ever been able to see before. So he wasn't even insulting or knocking the original prophet. He was just saying, well, this guy did the best he could with what he had, which basically was nothing. And Afson is saying, you guys can all see the same thing too. If you use this same instrument, anyone and everyone can go out there and look at the night sky and see what I saw. I'm not special. I just want to disseminate this knowledge. I want to elevate our entire people. Because the more we know, the smarter we are, the better we are. And I've learned that based on our position next to this planet, our world is doomed, and we need to figure out a way to get off this planet, some way, somehow. And he's basically saying, listen, if we fight each other on this, we're going to be wasting precious amounts of time. We need to work together. We need to come together as one people. It doesn't matter what you believe or don't believe in. The facts are the facts, and we need to start thinking of what we're going to do. Yes, it's going to happen generations down the road, but if we don't start trying to solve this problem now, we may not have enough time, and eventually that generation won't be far long enough to do anything about it. We need to start setting up a foundation that will inevitably result in a solution. So those who come after us can fix this problem, can continue on our work till we eventually get to a point where the work can be concluded. And that's his goal. And he's met, if something bad happens to him, maybe not what you might think based on what I just said, but you realize just how selfless of a character he is, and you realize how he is the best friend his entire species probably has ever had, because he's putting his own well-being, his own promise for power and position even for this cause, because he feels that he has as a scientist has a greater responsibility to the world at large, to people. He is a servant of this people. His goal is to do what is best for his people, even if it's not what they want to hear, even if it's not the popular thing. He's not in it for himself. He's in it for everyone. He is a scientist in the truest sense of the word, and that's one of the reasons I really enjoy this story as well, aside from being a spacey dinosaur story. I feel there is, in popular culture and just in media today, scientists are pegged as like these, ignorant, evil, out to for themselves. I mean, scientists are not these billionaire people who are not. They're not lobbyists. They're not people who are receiving a lot of money. Most scientists probably make less money than you do. In fact, a lot of them have second jobs. It's. Unless you find a cure for cancer, and then you're going to get all kinds of grant money in the world. The average scientist isn't probably making that much more money than, a cashier at Costco. As sad as that might sound. They are literally doing what they're doing because they have a passion for it, and because they want to make the world a smarter, better place. They want to add to the world. They want to add to our working body of knowledge, so future generations have more than we have now. So it is a story that celebrates science and shows you just how selfless most of them are. That science, it truly is a calling, and science is a selfless act. It's not selfish, and there are people in our world today who would have you believe otherwise because they themselves are selfish and want to control and want to, just take for themselves at the expense of everyone and everything. And when scientists come along to do the opposite, to try to stop them because they are doing so at the expense of others, they try to essentially flip the script and try to make them look the way they in fact are, because they know that if people knew what they're up to, people would not rally behind them. So, make them look bad so no one pays attention to us until it's too late. And then we're already super rich, or we're dead and gone and we don't care, and whatever damage we've done, hey, who cares? Not our problem anymore, right? So I like that this is a story where you see people like that who are trying to maintain this form of control, not because they care about their faith, not because they truly believe, I mean they do, but it's about selfishness. It's about they want to hang on to power, they want to hang on to their level of comfort, and they don't want to think that they've wasted their whole life believing in something that wasn't true. So it's just about their own personal ego and their own personal need for things. They don't care about other people, and once they're dead, hey, they don't care anymore. So they would essentially doom everyone just because it's not happening in their life. And the end of this world is not going to happen in their lifetime, so they don't care. They don't care. If it's going to happen generations from now, who cares? We'll be dead and gone, and before that happens, we would have lived a life of luxury. So we don't care. And that's what he is battling against. He is battling against a group of people who are incredibly selfish, who are thinking only of themselves, and who are benefiting literally at the expense of everyone else, while trying to project an image of the opposite of that, and that the people who are actually trying to help the general public, that in fact they are the selfish ones. They are trying to basically take the evil that is them and make it look like it's someone else. So the mob is too busy attacking this one person when they're not paying attention to them, because as you find here in this story, a lot of the general population that aren't trained in astrology or the religion itself don't even know how to read. And again, you look at history, the common folk could not read. When they would go to church, only the priest or the minister or whatever would know how to read, and they would cherry pick the best bits out of the holy book while leaving all the really contradictory stuff out. So it's a system of control, it's a system of power, and when this character comes along, he does to try to say, no, everyone can see what I've seen, everyone should know how to see it, and everyone should be taught science. Everyone should be taught how to read. Everyone should be taught how to use these scientific instruments. Everyone should be able to do what I do. What I should do should not be special and should not be reserved for me alone or people like me. Everyone should have a basic working knowledge of science, language, mathematics, so everyone can at least observe and understand, basic fundamentals that we see in the natural world and beyond. This should not be privileged material, because when you make it privileged material, that's how you make it so certain groups of people can control other larger groups of people. So the irony is, even though this book was written well over 20 years ago, closer to 30, it is perhaps more relevant today, which is kind of scary, because when this book was written, it's very much a parallel to a much older point in history. And yet, today we find ourselves in a point in our modern history that resembles elements of this older era. So it is very strange how history repeats itself, because this book went from being very unrelevant to the time in which it was written, being more relevant to a bygone time, and now suddenly becoming relevant again in the modern age, based on this, this opposing force to science and progress and knowledge. This perhaps, hopefully, last gasp of an ignorant old world, as ignorant old men, try to promote that which will allow them comfort, wealth, and power at the expense of everyone else, until eventually they themselves, go quietly into that good night. And then eventually that's how change really happens. As the old guard dies and the newer one eventually takes its place. But usually right before the end, there's again that last gasp, and this is kind of the story of that. It is kind of the final gasp of a society that has been built upon ignorance, not at their own fault, again, working with what they had, but now it is time for them to kind of ascend. It is time for them to kind of rise out of this dark age sense of thinking and into a more modern way of thinking, a way that is going to lead them into the future and lead them off this world, which if they do not, if they continue to be shackled by the past, they will die along with this world. And they now need to kind of move forward. And that is kind of basically what this story is all about. Initially enough, it's a lot. And yet this book is barely over 200 pages long. It's a brisk read, yet it is, because of that, it doesn't linger, and it gets to the point, and it hits all the notes it needs to when it needs to at just the right time or at the moment, and it gives you everything you need. And because of that, it actually feels like it's a longer book. I kept thinking like, wow, this felt like it was a 300-400 page book. No, I think it's about 260, maybe 219 pages, something like that. So it's not a long book, yet it has a lot to say, and it does so very, very well, and it communicates a very important message, and it does so effectively. And when you see these events, these behaviors, these attitudes from a race that is not human beings, I think it allows us to kind of step outside of ourselves enough to kind of see how foolish a lot of this is. And then when you realize that human beings are the ones who are doing all this stuff, that this, this is supposed to be an analogy to kind of our history, you realize just how silly it really is, and almost you feel a little bit embarrassed, a little bit like, wow, how could we be, could we have been so ignorant? How could we resist against progress that is so clearly the right thing to do? And how are we still kind of doing it now? Don't we all feel just a little stupid and a little embarrassed for ourselves that in 2019 we're still seeing some of this going on, and that we're all not, when someone maybe speaks up like this, we're not thinking like, wow, that's the stupidest thing I've heard in a while, right? The fact that there's still people who kind of go, well, that makes sense. But when you read it in this story, you realize, no, that doesn't make sense. That sounds ridiculous. And because I'm hearing it spoken, off the lips of a being that is not human, is on a completely different world, you can kind of step outside of it enough to realize that, wow, yeah, that's what that looks like? Ooh, yeah, no, that's bad. So I think, again, this story is perhaps more relevant today than it has been in quite some time. More relevant than it was when it was written, which isn't necessarily a good thing, because that kind of means we've gone backwards a little bit, and there is nothing great about that. So with that said, this book is a little political. It does have a lot to say, and based on it, when you read it, you'll clearly see, be able to kind of deduce the author's viewpoints on science, politics, religion, and depending on where you stand on that, you might find this book incredibly offensive. But you know what? That's great, because one of the worst reviews a book or any kind of really popular media thing can get is when people just goes, meh, it's all right. It doesn't stir anything deeper beyond just whatever. It doesn't defend you, or it doesn't, thrill you or motivate you. It's just kind of like, okay, well, you didn't piss anybody off, but you didn't excite anyone either. So the fact that I read this book and was very much motivated and inspired meant that someone else might read it and be horribly offended by it and think it's the worst book ever. And a book that has the power to elicit responses, an emotional response from somebody that strong on either side of the spectrum, means it's a good book, because it was able to make you feel something strongly. So depending on where you guys, what you believe, what you feel, what you think, this book may be, may make your blood boil. You may just think it's the worst thing ever, and you may just want to burn it after. Or you might think it's brilliant, and that it has a lot to say, and that it does a good job of doing it, and that it is conveying a very important message. That is the side of the line I stand on. But based on this video and a few others I've talked about here, I'm sure you guys can probably figure out where I stand on both politics, religion, and science. And again, this isn't a preachy channel, but every so often I'm going to talk about stuff that dives into that kind of material. And I'm, without trying to be too obvious, even though I'm pretty sure I'm pretty obvious in this video, you can kind of deduce where I stand on. So I will recommend this book wholeheartedly, with the disclaimer saying, if you are of a certain viewpoint, both politically and ideologically, You might read this book and feel that it is just propaganda. Or you might read this book and feel like, yep, this is a breath of fresh air. This is the kind of stuff we need to hear. It's all going to come down to you. It's going to come down to what you think, how you feel, and why you feel that way. Regardless, I think everyone should check it out and read it, because even if you read it and don't like it and you disagree with it, you're offended by it, at the very least might put into clearer perspective as why you feel that way, why your beliefs are important to you, and why you hold those beliefs. Like, why do you believe that? It might, if nothing else, at least help you understand you better and help you understand that why what's important to you is important to you. And for those of you who are on the opposite side of it, you might look at it and again, it just kind of reaffirms what you've been saying, except now it's a cool story with 8 anthropomorphic T-Rexes, and there you go. Far-Seer, I highly recommend it. So if you guys have read it, as always, give me some of your comments. Let me know what you think. If you have not read it, as always, I will leave the links in the description section below. You can go check it out, pick it up, give it a read, come back, give me some of your thoughts. If you guys have, those of you who have read it and who have read the other 2 books that come after it, don't spoil anything for me. Again, I plan on reading them. I've ordered them. They're on their way. I like having like physical books. I'm old school, I guess. I like having the book in my hand. So I've ordered like these nice first edition hard copy versions of them. So I will be reading them, rest assured, and I will be, unless they really deviate and I don't like them at all, because again, on this show I don't give bad reviews. I don't talk about things I don't like, so it's not really a review show. That's why I say it's a recommendation. There's plenty of things that I don't like, and therefore I don't talk about them on here. But if I like something and I think it's worth your time, I'll recommend it to you. So as long as these books are as good or better than Far-Seer, then yeah, I'll be definitely talking about them on this channel, on this show. So as always, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace!